Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the 4-3 show. It is a wonderful Monday night. I am your host, Ryan Blank. I'm alongside Parker Dunn and Dominic Stern. Sadly, no Pat Fortuna, but we've got the best trio in the business. Guys, how are we doing today?
Decent.
I'm doing good. Baseball season is alive and well, but at the same time, Ryan, it's also NFL draft season. And the draft is in a week and a half, and that's what we're here to talk about, right?
Yes, sir. But before we get into that, we have to talk about the big announcement today that came from Chet Holmgren. The number one recruit in the 2021 class has made his decision, and he is going to play for Mark Few and the Gonzaga Bulldogs. What do we think of Chet making his decision and to go join the Bulldogs?
I think it's a great decision by Chet. He's going to go play for a team that's going to give him a chance to win a national title, and I think that's what a lot of guys that are of Chet Holmgren's caliber that are probably only going to be playing 1 year in college basketball, that's what they should go do. Go give yourself a chance to play in the bright lights against the best teams. Now, Gonzaga doesn't do that for the entire season, but at the beginning of the season and then at the end of the season, they certainly do. And that's what really matters, and he's going to get a chance to show what he's got and hopefully get drafted high in the NBA draft after having a chance of winning an NBA championship.
I believe you mean a NCAA championship.
NCAA, yes. I apologize.
Parker, over to you. What do you think?
I love it. I knew when he announced a couple days ago that he was going to decide today that the odds were really good for Gonzaga. It just seemed like a match made in heaven. All the teams that he had a chance to join are very good. UNC was one of them. Of course, they're coming off a bad year. You can go down the line of the teams and say why he should have gone to one or the other, but Gonzaga just made a lot of sense. Historically, they bring in a lot of good big men, especially in recent memory, and I think he's just going to add to that. It's interesting to see that he's going to join the team of Jalen Suggs, who declared for the NBA draft today. They were both high school teammates. They were a very dynamic duo. Of course, it was very well known that Suggs was going to declare no matter what after the season he had, and because of the caliber of player that he is, and he wants to make some money, so it makes sense. But I do have to say, it's a bummer that we don't get to see those two reunite in a Gonzaga uniform. Of course, it was not going to happen, but it sure is fun to think of how special that could have been at the collegiate level as well. But I expect a lot of big things over there. This is a great move, and I think it's one where he's going to be there for 1 year, and we'll see if he can make the most of it and get an natty.
If I were still a betting man, I would have put money on Chet going to Gonzaga. I think this is a great move for him. I think that Gonzaga is not regrouping or retooling or anything. They're just reloading is what they're doing. If Drew Timme stays, that duo in the front court is going to be electric and the best in the country without a doubt. Because Timme hasn't made his decision yet, and I think he'll go test the waters at least. But if he decides to return to Gonzaga for another year, their front court is going to be insane. But Chet Holmgren, he's amazing on both sides of the ball. He has great handles. He's got a good shot. He can post you up down low. And he's even better on the defensive side. He's a terrific defender as well. So Gonzaga's got a very, very top talent who's probably going to be the number one pick in the 2022 NBA draft, in my opinion. Now, Dom, you mentioned it earlier. Let's talk about the NFL draft. It is a week from Thursday where we will have new names entering the NFL. And let's continue our rankings. We did quarterbacks and running backs last week. Let's start with wide receivers. And Dom, I want to go to you first. Who are your top 5 receivers this year?
Yeah, so I actually just decided to give 6. That way, I make it very clear and concise to the 4-3 show listeners who I think the best wide receivers are. And at number 6, I ended up slotting in Kadarius Toney, very speedy and shifty wide receiver out of Florida. I was very impressed with his game, and he was a very important part of why Florida had one of the best offenses, if not the best offense. It wasn't the best. Alabama had the best offense in the nation, and it showed when Florida went up against Oklahoma without some of their best players because they declared for the draft and they said, we don't want to play in this game. Kyle Trask sucked. It was rough to watch. And a large part of that was because Kadarius Toney, as well as Kyle Pitts, who was much better than Kadarius Toney, didn't play in that game. And it showed. But Toney, he's been number 6. Number 5 is Terrace Marshall. He's a guy that I've been super impressed with after doing a better study of him. He didn't really stand out because he was the number 3 guy on the LSU championship team. But then after Jamar Chase, who we'll talk about in a little bit, opted out of the season, Marshall ended up taking over as the number 1 guy. And LSU didn't get a ton of attention this past season because they weren't as good as they were in the previous couple of years. But Marshall was definitely one of the guys to watch for that team. Number 4, this might surprise you guys. It's the Heisman Trophy winner, Devonta Smith. I have him below the other 3 guys, or below the other 2 guys, and then I have another guy that I'm extremely high on, Devonta Smith. His route running is absolutely superb, but to me, that's what he demonstrates the best at. And there's just a couple other guys who show me better catching skills, and I'm a little bit concerned about Smith's size, which he can of course change over the course of his career and over the course of the next couple of months leading up to the regular season. But I'm concerned because he's going to be facing much better corners than he has been in college. And when that does happen, he's going to get pressed off the line, and I'm not sure that's going to be too favorable for him. Number 3, it's Marshawn Bateman from Minnesota. I've just been super impressed with his overall skill set. And to me, what he did at the University of Minnesota was super impressive. And he just absolutely dominated Big Ten corners. And to me, I don't really see a flaw in his game. It's just he's a really good overall wide receiver. So I have Bateman at 3. I have Jamar Chase at number 2. Super talented, super physical wide receiver. He opted out of the season, and it's not going to hurt his draft stock. But the guy that I believe jumped in front of him, Jalen Waddle, he was so impressive earlier on in the year. And in my opinion, was much better than Devonta Smith. Then, of course, Waddle went down, and then Devonta Smith just got everything thrown to him because, of course, he's a fantastic wide receiver. But Jalen Waddle is just so electric, so talented, and I have him as my number 1 wide receiver in this draft class.
Parker, over to you.
For me, I'm just going to go kind of how we do with the last rankings, go starting with the best one. And it seems like Jamar Chase's name comes up a lot, but I don't know. I want to put Devonta Smith up there. At the end of the day, we didn't get to see both of them play this season because of Chase opting out, but we did get to see Smith, and he won a Heisman. He did something that very few guys at his position have been able to ever do, and he had a spectacular season. He had over 1,800 receiving yards, I believe. It was something around that mark after they had won the national championship game, since he went absolutely nuts in both the semi and in the championship game. And his size is a concern. He's built to be more of a fragile receiver, but he hasn't had injury history. He's been able to stay healthy at Alabama and do a lot of great things, and his numbers back up why he should be that top guy. I just feel like everything he's done up until this point deserves that number 1 ranking. Will his game translate directly to the NFL? Not necessarily. Should he need to add some weight? Potentially. But as of right now, he has that ranking for me. Then the guy I just mentioned, Jamar Chase. His numbers were absolutely incredible. I mean, everyone's numbers on that LSU receiving squad were definitely bolstered because of that offense. I mean, Joe Burrow was slinging the rock around, him and Justin Jefferson, and then Terrace Marshall, who you mentioned. They were feasting off of that offense and the play calling that they had. He did a lot. It's a bummer that we didn't get to see him this season, but I know that if he did, although he wasn't going to have the likes of Joe Burrow throwing him the ball, he was still going to put up some monster numbers. He's got big size. He's actually a little bit shorter, but he's definitely a lot more built. He's bigger, more physical receiver, so he gets that 2 spot. Then with number 3 is Jalen Waddle. I was originally higher on Waddle coming into this season than I was on Smith because of what he can do after the catch. He was huge in the return game. He's so shifty. He's so hard to tackle. The agility that he has is really incredible, and I think some people do have him over Smith for that reason. Some think that he could be drafted above him. I don't think he will. I wouldn't be completely shocked if he did, I guess, based on the viewpoint of him comparatively to him. But I do think that he is one of the most talented receivers, and I've thought that for a while now. That Alabama receiving core is just absolutely crazy when you really look at it. Then with that 4th spot, I would say it is Rashad Bateman. He's got all the physical tools that you want in a receiver, towering over guys at 6'2". He's not quite that DK Metcalf, and we haven't seen his metrics as far as how they compare to him, but he is a freak of nature in that sense, especially compared to the other 2 guys that I did mention. He's the biggest, he's the more physical of those guys, and he did some good things in Minnesota, especially in 2019. 2020, he only played in 5 games, so his numbers couldn't really reach the true potential that they had. but he definitely has all the physical traits of an NFL receiver. Then to wrap it off for the top 5, it's definitely got to be Tony. I agree with him being in that list. Instead of him being at 6, though, he's just going to round out my 5. There's so much high praise for him for good reason. Kyle Pitts was the star of that offense, but definitely don't get it twisted because Tony had a huge impact as well in the receiving core. He did some incredible things. He's one of the shiftiest as well. Him and Waddle are very similar in that sense, and there's a reason why I have them so highly regarded on this list.
For me, I as well have 6, and my 6 is going to be Kadarius Toney. He had a career season. He finally broke out. He had over 900 yards receiving, 10 touchdowns. He was a huge piece of why Kyle Trask played the way that he did throughout the regular season. Don't talk about the bowl game. He didn't have Toney or Pitts, but when he had both those guys, but when there was Kadarius Toney and Trask had him, you give Toney the ball, he will make a play. He's shifty, he's agile, he's fast. He is going to be a very, very good slot receiver, and you can even play him outside as well. My other guy, I'm going to go with at number 5. I'm going to say Terrace Marshall. I really like Terrace Marshall. I think he's got great hands. I think that his size is terrific. I think that's going to be one of the defining factors for him to be taken so high is that he's got great size and hands and physicality. So I really like that about Terrace Marshall. Number 4, I'm going to shock you guys a little bit. I'm going to go Jalen Waddle at 4. And the reason I say Jalen Waddle is because that injury to his ankle still has me a little bit worried. But outside of that, I still think Jalen Waddle is a terrific wide receiver. He can be played inside, outside, maybe even in the backfield a little bit. I really think Jalen Waddle, if he can stay healthy, then he's going to be a guy that can be an impact receiver from the get-go. Number 3, I'm going to go with Rashad Bateman out of Minnesota. I've been high on this dude since last year. And he's got the size. He's got the physicality. He's got great hands, ball security. He's tough. And he's got a very diverse route tree. So I really like Rashad Bateman. I've been high on him, and I think he is going to be I think he could easily be a Pro Bowl receiver for years. Number 2, I'm going to go with Devonta Smith. I think that Devonta Smith, he proved where he could go. He proved how talented he was this past season when there was no Jalen Waddle. Yeah, his size is a little bit worrisome, but get him on a weight training program. He'll gain some weight, and I think that'll help him. But he's got the speed. He's got the body control. He's got the hands. He's got everything you want in a wide receiver. You just need him to add some weight. So that's my only worry with Devonta Smith. But you saw how electric he is, and I think that he is going to be a very top-end receiver in this class. And then my top guy is Ja'Marr Chase. You saw what he did with Joe Burrow, and it sucked that he didn't play this past year, but he set SEC records as a true sophomore, receiving yards having over 1,700, touchdowns. He had 20 of them. He really worked on his route running, which is really good. I think he's got a very good route running tree. He's got great hands. His size is a little bit worrisome, maybe at best, but I think the best thing that I like about Ja'Marr Chase is that he is a good run blocker as well. He's a very good blocker. So I think he is the top wide receiver in this class. And the reason that he's not getting that ultimate praise as being the true number 1 is because he didn't play this past year. We've talked about wide receivers. Let's go to tight ends. We all know who the number 1 obvious choice is, but who falls after him? Parker, I want to go to you.
Well, yeah, I mean, the name that you were implying was Kyle Pitts. He's a freak of nature. So we got to talk about him a little bit just because for some people who may not be as familiar, I mean, this is one of those guys where, like, the way that he's being talked about in this draft is being once in generational. We've seen a lot of good tight ends in recent years. It's a position that doesn't have quite as much value as some other ones. But when you see a guy like him who's such a receiving threat, you can put him at straight-up wide receiver and have him succeed and win one-on-one matchups, or you can even have him run block at a very high level. I think that what he did is incredible at Florida. So he's going to be a guy that potentially does go first as far as receivers off the board. I personally don't think he will, but he's definitely in that conversation. He's going to be pretty close. We'll just have to see based on team needs, depending on where he goes. After him, though, it goes to one of the better schools for tight ends, and that's Penn State's tight end, Pat. I don't know Freiermuth. A lot of these names I'm not very sure to pronounce. I watched these guys play, but I just can't think back to when they pronounce their names. But Penn State is a school that's produced a lot of good tight ends. He's one of them. It seems like them, Notre Dame, UCLA, like there's certain schools that are just good for that position, and they're one of them. He was exceptional. We've seen guys that have come out of there like Gesicki. That's one of the guys that comes recent in mind who plays over with the Dolphins. He's another really good one over there. I don't have too many rankings as far as like with the wide receivers just because I don't focus on that position the same way. I don't have the same knowledge on these guys, but he is a guy that I know has been mentioned in a lot of mock drafts. Not to go in the first round like Pitts, but certainly to be one of those guys taken pretty early, probably on day 2. Another one is Trey McKitty out of Georgia. That's a name that's come to mind a lot. He put up some good numbers over there. They didn't have too many huge name receivers, kind of like with the Alabamas or the LSUs out there. But he was a guy that put in some good work, and I know that he definitely comes to mind. Another one is Tommy Tremble. I just mentioned Notre Dame as far as being a school that produces tight ends. They had Cole Kmet last year, and now here's another one. It seems like they're consistently producing guys in and out every single year, and he's just one of the many guys to come out of there who put some good numbers together, and you can expect to have some success at the next level. So I think that there's plenty of guys. He's one of those guys that's better when it comes to run blocking, very dominant at the line, and see him winning a lot of battles.
Yeah, I didn't come with a tight end ranking list, but a tight end that I also really like is Brevin Jordan, and he went to the University of Miami. And similar to what Parker said about Penn State, Miami also produces a ton of pro tight ends. You look at Chris Herndon, who, I mean, hasn't been great with the Jets, but still got there. Jimmy Graham was one of the best tight ends in this era of football, along with Greg Olsen and David Njoku. They just produce great tight ends. It's something that they've done there. And Brevin Jordan is going to follow in that suit as well. Nick Eubanks, he's not one of the higher guys ranked up on a lot of lists, but his size is certainly impressive. It's 6'5", 256, super physical run blocker, and he can also catch the ball down the field. So I think that's a very valuable tight end. And then Tommy Tremble. Notre Dame recently has produced a lot of really good tight ends, not as like prolonged success as the University of Miami, but for Tommy Tremble out of Notre Dame, he's very young. He's very athletic at 6'4" and 248 pounds, and he's a guy that I think some teams could want to stumble upon.
Yeah, I got to talk about Kyle Pitts for a second. This guy's a generational talent. He's been said to be one. He can be used as both a wide receiver and a tight end. He's got the speed. He's got the size. He's got the ability. This is a guy who I think a lot of teams are interested in trading up for. You know that there's teams that are interested in Miami's pick and the Cowboys pick. Teams are looking to trade up to potentially get a guy like Kyle Pitts. He could be a difference maker on an offense, and I think he is going to be one of the very first guys selected. I think he's going to be a top 5 pick. After him, I got to look at Pat Freiermuth as well. I think that you didn't really see a ton from him this year. You saw a lot from him last year. And I just think that he's great in the passing game. He's got great hands. He's very good downfield. He's a nice vertical threat. Same thing with Nick Eubanks. Very good run blocker. He's a guy that you will bring in when you need an extra guy on the line for a 4th and 1 type situation or just to run the ball. And he's a very dominant, not dominant, I would say a solid vertical threat. So I like both those guys. I'm a huge fan of Brevin Jordan. I really like Brevin Jordan. I think that for him, you didn't see a ton from him this year, but he's a dynamic weapon. And what you've seen from him is that you can put him all over the line, all over the formation, and he'll still be able to put up numbers. So I really like Brevin Jordan. He's also, I think, one of the better route runners in this tight end draft class. So I really like him as well. Next up, let's go from the receiving aspect to the trenches. Let's go to the offensive tackles. Who stands out outside of Penei Sewell? Dom, let's go to you.
Yeah, I mean, Penei Sewell, it's Penei Sewell. He is, I mean, a generational offensive tackle prospect. And he, I mean, what he was able to do for an absolutely loaded Oregon offensive line in 2020. No, it was 2019. I'm losing my years now. Now that we've shifted over into 2021 and the years have been so lost, I'm losing them. But like Jamar Chase opted out of the 2020, I got that one right, season. So we didn't get to see him play again. Oregon still won the Pac-12 because they're that good. But Sewell anchored what was one of the best college offensive lines I've ever watched, and it was super impressive to watch. He's obviously the number one offensive tackle or offensive lineman in this class, but I really believe that he should be a top 5 pick in this draft. And if you're either the Bengals or the Falcons sitting there at 4 or 5, and you let this man go past you, I really don't know what you're doing. People have listened to the show know that I'm a big proponent. You win the football game at the line of scrimmage. And, for me being someone who's 5'10 and used to be like 140, it's a really weird thing for me to say. But I truly believe that if you control the line of scrimmage like we saw what the Buccaneers did all playoffs, you're going to win the game. It doesn't matter what you have on the outside. It doesn't matter what you have deep. All that matters is if you control the line of scrimmage, you win games. So these guys are some of the most important picks to make, and you can't miss these picks. So with that being said, Penei Sewell should be a top 5 pick, and if he's not, there's going to be some serious problems. Anyways, my top 5 offensive linemen. Next guy up, I got Rashawn Slater out of Northwestern, and really smart player. Obviously, he went to Northwestern. It should go without saying, but super talented offensive tackle, and I think that he should be definitely taken higher up in the first round. Christian Darrisaw, offensive tackle out of Virginia Tech. I got him ranked at number 3. Very talented guy there at Virginia Tech, and they've been able to run the ball extremely well over the past couple of years, and that's largely in part because of Darrisaw. Number 4 is Elijah Vera Tucker. Elijah Vera Tucker from USC. Man, I'm all over the place, but super physical offensive tackle at 315 pounds. He anchored a really talented USC offensive line this year that almost made it to winning the Pac-12. They, of course, did not because they lost to Oregon. And then next up, I got Tevin Jenkins from Oklahoma State. Really big offensive lineman at 6'6", 320. Really lanky. Can block guys like nobody's business.
Parker, over to you.
Yeah, just one quick word just to add to how good Penei Sewell is. I mean, out of high school, he was the number 1 offensive lineman prospect for a reason. It just seemed like he was an absolute monster at such an early age. He was going to dominate college ball no matter where he went. His 2 choices were Pac-12 schools. It was between Oregon, which of course he played at, and also USC. Back then, I was really hoping he'd commit to USC. He ultimately went the Oregon route. It paid off. He had a lot of success there and was part of some good football teams. And he's just an absolute freak of nature, and he's like the Quentin Nelson of offensive tackles for this year, just to look back not that long ago as far as offensive lineman prospects, where he's guaranteed to go definitely in the top 10, and I believe as well he should go in the top 5 because he's that good, and his position is extremely valuable. To have a left tackle, it is just such a big need. It's second to the quarterback, in my opinion, so you have to be able to do what it takes to protect him. You look at Cincy, you also mentioned that, Dom, and you have Joe Burrow. He's coming off a torn ACL. You have to protect him. He's your franchise quarterback. There's no better way to do it than to go back-to-back drafts to get a guy like him to protect him. I think it'd be really dumb if they go any other route. I've seen a lot of mock drafts seeing them take wide receivers. It's definitely something that they can improve, but definitely don't do that with that pick. Wait till later in the draft. A lot of talented receivers, but he's legit. Then after him, since it's really just a fight for second with a lot of these position rankings, is Rashawn Slater as well from Northwestern. They've produced some good offensive linemen recently. He's one of them. He's an absolute workhorse on that line. He's going to do some really good things. I expect him to also go very high. There's a lot of teams that need tackles. It's a great position of need for many. So I expect him to go in the first round as well, and more like a right around top 20, top 15 pick for sure. The gap between him and Sewell is definitely going to be pretty significant, but he still deserves to be taken rather early. Then you go to Christian Darrisaw from Virginia Tech as well. Another really good 6'5", 314-pound monster on the offensive line. Great run blocker. Very well-balanced offensive lineman. He deserves to round up right after Slater. The rankings after Sewell really get closer, so you can look at it either way you want, but I definitely think that he's right there. My rankings as of right now after this pick are going to be the same. Elijah Vera Tucker from USC. I definitely watched more of him than most of these offensive linemen. He did a lot of good things, and as soon as he declared, knew he was definitely going to be a first-round pick, definitely more towards the latter half of the first round, but a first-round pick nonetheless. I expect him to go pretty early in that sense for the whole draft, and he is very good. He was a part of a hugely improved offensive line. I mean, the year before, that awful O-line, oh my God, USC's O-line was terrible. They drastically improved. He was the leader of that unit. He was a big reason for that. Then I look at Alex Leatherwood. Tevin Jenkins is another really good one, but I look at what Alabama consistently does. They produce a lot of really good offensive tackles, and he's another one of those through that revolving door over there at Alabama. They dominate a lot of positions as far as what they produce consistently. That is one of the more underrated ones that they're always doing. I think you can trust a guy like that. He's built. He's huge. He's not quite as big as Jenkins, but he has similar height. The metrics are relatively close, and I think that he wraps off the top 5.
All right. Penei Sewell easily is going to be a top 5 pick. If not, we have a lot of issues.
I don't think he's easily a top 5 pick, though. Like, I would be 0% shocked if the Falcons go Pitts 4 and then the Bengals be idiots and draft another wide receiver.
I don't think the Bengals should draft a wide receiver. I think the Bengals would be stupid if they let Penei Sewell go if he's there. They need to protect Joe Burrow.
Right, but I agree with you. You are 100% right. They should draft Penei Sewell, and I think all three of us should agree with that. I mean, if we're being real, who should the Falcons draft? It's Penei Sewell is who they should draft.
That's who they should take.
If he gets outside the top 5.
After the Bengals should take him. Like, he should not fall past any of those teams. And if he does, he is so good that, like, you just take him based on the fact that he's the best prospect at that point.
Yeah. So he's easily number 1. Elijah Vera Tucker's been really good. Like Parker said, he was a big piece of that offensive line at USC, and really a very much improved one from 2019 to 2020. He can play left tackle. He's got a ton of athleticism to where he can be a top-tier talent, as he's got great body control as well for an offensive lineman. Another guy that I want to look at, of course, is Rashawn Slater. I think he's a guy who has really moved up the charts a lot, and I think that he's a guy who could come in and be a rotational piece or even be a starter around at your right tackle position. I wouldn't put him at left tackle, but I really like Rashawn Slater. Another guy that I want to highlight that you guys haven't mentioned is Liam Eichenberg out of Notre Dame. I think he is an NFL-ready starting left tackle. I really think that. And honestly, I think the Chiefs should easily take him at 31 if he's there, unless someone like Vera Tucker or someone who's above him falls. But I really like Liam Eichenberg. He was really, really good with Notre Dame this year. Ian Book had some good protection throughout the year, and Eichenberg was the guy there. And I think that
good protection. He wasn't. Ian Book sucks. I'm
okay. I'm not talking about. Yeah, I'm not talking about Ian Book.
No, I don't think Ian Book was good because the offensive line was insane at Notre Dame. And it's been insane for the past 6 years. And they make their quarterbacks look good, and then they go to the pros and they look like scrubs.
Yeah, I don't think Ian Book's good. It was his offensive line. We all know this. So,
well, a lot of people don't, and it's sad.
But no, I think that for Eichenberg, he's a very good run blocking guy who's also solid pass. But I think his bread and butter is when you have your offense running the ball. I think that he is going to be easily a first-round pick. If he falls out of the first round, then people are just making some bad calls because offensive line is the biggest need. And if the Chiefs don't take an offensive lineman, you guys know what happened last year, it'll be worse. So after that, I think that Tevin Jenkins is really good. I like him as well at Oklahoma State. Christian Darrisaw was not someone that I was high on coming into the season, but I think that his ability that he's been able to start throughout since he was a true freshman, I think shows a lot how he's grown and improved. So, and he's got great strength. So I really like him as well. So those are my guys. Another guy, last guy I really want to highlight is Jalen Mayfield out of Michigan. He was solid this year. So I think that he'll be a guy who goes mid-second round. Now let's switch over from the offensive side to the defensive side. And let's go at edge rushers. Who do we have at the top for our edge rushers? And Parker, over to you.
Well, these rankings, I mean, I can give you a list, but one of the guys that I'm consistently seeing falling in stock is Gregory Rousseau. And I get that there are some concerns based on his first step quickness, his technique, and he's been deemed sort of like a project for the NFL. But talk about freakish potential. I mean, he had 15 and a half sacks in 2019. I knew it was a lot, so I wanted to double check and make sure. And it was that's an unbelievable number to have at any level of football. I think that if you look at his body of work at Miami, a school that's usually able to produce some good defensive players, I think it's just a little bit strange because he has a teammate in Jalen Phillips who's also projected to go pretty high and is pretty highly regarded as far as edge rushers go. But I just feel like he's being disrespected a little bit because he did that back in 2019. He didn't play this season, but I feel like you have to look at the body of work that he has and look at the potential. And his potential is just about better than anyone else that I see as far as pass rushers as I'm going down the list or as far as mock drafts that I'm looking at. And I feel like, yes, I can compile some other guys that are, I think, ranked rather high because there's a lot of names that stand out. But I just feel like it's more beneficial to mention this because I don't understand why he's deemed the 9th best on a site like CBS. I mean, there's a ton of different sites, and you can say whatever you want about CBS and the rankings, but this is the first one I saw, and just trying to compare it to some other ones, I think it's absurd that he's ranked that low.
Dom, you're on mute.
Yeah, notice that. I don't have it in my top 5, but I definitely did notice some sites were ranking a little lower than mine. I actually had him at 6, so for this one, I'm actually going to go bottom to top here. But yeah, like you mentioned, I mean, the size and the speed, once he gets going, and the strength certainly pop off when you watch his film. But when you take a look and you really watch his film and you watch people break down his film, it's a struggle at times. And there are some things he needs to work on. He's a project, you're right. But at the same time, a lot of guys end up not being drafted that high, but end up being great pass rushers. So I'm sure someone will take a chance on him, whether it's with the first-round pick or with a day 2 pick. He's going to be good at some point in the NFL, but he needs to go somewhere where a team is going to work with him. And if he lands in a very good spot, like a team that has a defensive heavy coach, you could really see Rousseau be one of the steals of this draft. But with that being said, my top 5, I'm going to start with Jason Owe from Penn State. Really talented guy, really speedy, and I like him a lot. And then number 4, I'm going to go with Rousseau's teammate at the U. I'm going to have Jalen Phillips. He was, frankly, just a little bit more productive at Miami, and he showed more consistency than Rousseau. Now you'd see the games where Rousseau would have his great games, and that's when Miami's defense would be really good, and people would be like, the U's back. Well, the U's not back, and that they need more players like Phillips and less players like Rousseau. Number 3, Joseph Ossai. This is another guy who a lot of people were really high on coming into the year, but as they've watched some film, aren't as high on him. But I mean, you just watch Ossai, and he doesn't have the capability that Rousseau had, where Phillips was on the other side. Ossai was kind of left on the edge, and teams could double team him because they didn't have to worry about 2 elite pass rushers from Texas. Ossai is an extremely physical and an extremely fast edge rusher. He blew apart Big 12 offensive lines, and I have a good feeling he's going to do it to NFL O-lines as well. Number 2 is Azeez Ojulari from the University of Georgia. He is pretty fantastic, and I'm a big fan of his. Super smart player. Georgia's been breeding defensive players like mad, and Ojulari is certainly going to fall into that category. Another school that has breeded a lot of really good pass rushers as of late. And this one is of course, falling in the same category for Michigan. Kwity Paye, super talented, super fast, and he's going to cause problems in the NFL.
Yeah, I agree. My number 5, I'm going to go with, thinking about it, I'm going to go with Jason Owe. I think that he's got tremendous speed and strength, and he's really been rising throughout the past couple months. The other guy I'm going to go with, who's I think tied with him, is Joseph Ossai. I think he's also a guy who's got a lot of strength. He fell a little bit, but I still think he's up there as well. Gregory Rousseau is going to be my number 4. The guy's a freak of nature. There's no doubt about that. He had 19.5 tackles for loss, and I believe 15.5 sacks in 2019 by himself. And he opted out of the 2020 season, which I think has an effect, but he's physical. He's got a ton of athleticism, but his game is also a little bit underdeveloped. So that's why I have him at 4. Number 3, that's where I'm going to put Azeez Ojulari. I think that for him on the edge, he's got the quickness and he's got the motor to really be disruptive to offensive lines. I think that he lacks the size a little bit, but I still think he is someone who is going to be able to wreak havoc on quarterbacks with his speed and agility. Number 2 is where I'm going to put Jalen Phillips. Talk about a guy who's just grown and actually become a top guy this past year with Gregory Rousseau not playing. So I really like Jalen Phillips. He's got size, he's got strength, and I think that he is going to be one of the top edge rushers taken. Number 1 is Kwity Paye. I've watched him at Michigan. The guy's an exciting prospect. He's got the physical ability. He's athletic. He does it all. He was the anchor of that defensive line for the Wolverines this past season. So those are my top 5 guys at the edge rushing position. Now let's move on to linebackers. Who do we have as the top linebackers in this draft? Dom, let's start with you.
My top linebacker is going to be Micah Parsons out of Penn State. Just super impressive, and he's been one of the guys that has been a part of the really strong Penn State teams. They, of course, weren't as good this past season, but really intelligent player at Penn State, and I think that he's going to be a leader of a defense at some point. Number 2, this is a really interesting prospect, Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah. And he's not the traditional linebacker in the fact that, plays in the middle of the field, can defend against the run. He's a guy that more so plays on the outside, and he matches up against wide receivers in the slot. And he reminds me a lot of Isaiah Simmons from Clemson. I don't think a lot of people give him that comp because he's not as tall and he's not as fast, but he's a guy that can match up with anyone on the field. So you can put him against a running back, a tight end, or a wide receiver. And he can also play against the run a little bit. That's not his strength by any stretch of the imagination, but a super talented player who can do a lot for your ball club. And I think that I wouldn't be surprised to see some teams that really value his versatility and will maybe jump up and reach him before a lot of people are expecting. Number 3 is Jamin Davis, and he's kind of the opposite of Jock. They call Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah Jock because it's J-O-K. But Jamin Davis is a smaller linebacker who is extremely physical, and he reminds me a lot of Denzel Perryman. He's just going to blow up the runs, and he doesn't care about his size. He doesn't care about what other people say. He's just going to do whatever he wants, and he's going to do it well. And he's going to be a guy that a lot of teams are going to want if they want to get better against the run. And he should be a first-round draft pick. Number 4, Baron Browning, Ohio State. They've breeded a lot of really talented linebackers, and Browning is certainly one of those guys that falls under that trap. And then Nick Bolton of Mizzou, an extremely fast linebacker that I think a lot of teams could like in the second round. Extremely talented, needs to get a little bit better mentally on the field, but his athleticism and his speed cannot be taught. And if he goes to a good team that can coach him up, he'll be a fantastic player.
Parker, over to you. Who do you have?
Well, I mean, Micah Parsons is kind of the consensus top linebacker in this draft. There's some issues with coverage skills for him. I mean, he's a freak of nature. We saw the 40 that he ran. He definitely meets all the metrics that you want in a player from a physical standpoint and athleticism perspective. But I think, he is ultimately number 1 for those reasons. He's a freak of nature. He's able to get to the quarterback very quickly. I think that's a huge trait for any linebacker, no matter where you put them on the field. I think that he's going to have to improve in coverage. He can't get beat by tight ends if he's ultimately going to be the best linebacker out of this draft. But as of right now, I would say it's fair to give him that point. I know he's been a locker room issue in Penn State. I don't know how wary teams are going to be. I mean, with how freakish he is, teams are going to take a chance on him anyway and take him high because of how much potential he does have. But we'll see if that prevails at the NFL level. I don't expect it to. I think he'll get whipped into shape with some of these locker rooms. But only time will tell with that kind of instance with a player. Then I would say also number 2 going down the line, Jeremiah Owusu. I think that he definitely meets the metrics as far as getting to the quarterback as well. He's a good rusher in that sense. And I think that overall he's got the speed and versatility to go with something like that. I think that he is the number 2 linebacker off the board for this one. I don't know how high he's going to go compared to Parsons, who's going to go pretty high. Definitely top 15, I would imagine. Again, it comes down to team needs, but somebody's going to want a guy like that. As for him, I'm not too sure. He definitely will be one of the higher linebackers off the board, though. Then Jamin Davis as well from Kentucky. He's very good in coverage skills. Man coverage is something that he's gotten a lot of prowess from, a lot of respect in that aspect of his game. And you look at his numbers when it comes to his interceptions. He had 3 of them in 2020. That's a good number for a linebacker. You see what he's able to do. And I think that linebackers being versatile, being able to cover receivers, or at the very least fast tight ends, is a really useful thing in the NFL at that level. So that's a great quality that he has. Another one is Jabril Cox out of LSU. LSU's continuing to produce some good linebackers. That's another good one. He's not quite like a Devin White like we saw not that long ago, but he is still a very good linebacker. And I think that he definitely has the traits to be a good one at the NFL level. He's able to diagnose plays really quickly, and he's able to get where he needs to be, get to the ball. He's able to follow it very well. And I think that would put him at the 4th spot. Then at 5, this one's a little, I mean, it is and it isn't a stretch from a talent and a potential perspective. Dylan Moses definitely meets the potential to be as high as 5, or even higher than that for that matter. The injury history is a little bit of a concern. Anytime you have a season-ending injury with his ACL, or anytime you have some of the other lack of consistency kind of plays that we see him getting himself into, it definitely makes you a little hesitant. But he was one of the best overall recruits coming out of high school for a reason. He has all the talent to be really good at the next level. It's kind of just a matter of staying healthy at this point. And I think that would wrap out the top 5, because I think ultimately, while there are some negatives, he's a really smart football player on the field for the most part.
For me, the obvious number 1 is Micah Parsons. You saw the difference between the Penn State defense when he was playing and when he wasn't. That defense fell apart without him. He had 2 great seasons, and he's proven that he can be a dynamic NFL linebacker. So he's number 1. The next one I would say is Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah. Wow, that's a name.
It's hard.
Yeah, it is. It's really hard.
That's what she said.
Okay, Pat. Glad to have you here today. That's definitely a Pat thing. But I'm just going to call him Jock, as you said, Dom. Jock's got the versatility, the athleticism, speed, and I think he's going to be an impact defender. I really think that he grew over this past year and has really seen his stock rise. Next up, I still like Zaven Collins out of Tulsa. I think that he was a 4-year starter, even though he did start at quarterback and linebacker in high school, 4-year start in high school. And then he really ended up being a top linebacker throughout his career, and which you've seen as he was highlighted with the Bronco Nagurski Trophy, which is awarded to the nation's best defensive player. He offers his size, length, speed, agility. I think he is going to be a guy who is taken in the mid to late part of the 1st round. Then next up, I am going to go with Baron Browning. I think he's the 4th best. He's got the athleticism. He just doesn't have the production from his collegiate career, so I think that's what puts him behind Collins, but he's got the athleticism to definitely be an impact guy in the middle of the defense. And then lastly, I'm going to go with Nick Bolton, someone who's been rumored to be a late 1st, early 2nd round pick. I think that when you have a guy who's got that great of explosiveness and his hit power, he's destined to be a guy who's great against the run. So I really like Nick Bolton in that aspect. Next up, let's go over to the back end and the defensive back, starting with the corners. And Parker, I want you to start.
Well, I would say that just especially with this player that I'm going to mention, it's so close. I feel like the top 2 corners between Caleb Farley and Patrick Surtain. The difference between the 2, though, is that Farley, again, is one of those many guys that opted out because of COVID. I remember that was big news when he decided to go that route at the beginning of the season, or I guess before the season. And it just shows how difficult this year is as far as looking at players and evaluating them. You don't get to see their most recent season. A lot of guys continue to get better progressively throughout their college careers. So the fact that we don't get to see that with him gives a little bit of a question mark as far as whether he should be that top guy. I think because of that, ultimately, Patrick Surtain's going to get that. I think that he is the number one for that reason. He was able to play and compete and win a national championship game, and he was a huge part of it from the defensive side of the ball. So I do think that he is number one, but not too far behind him is Caleb Farley. There's a lot to like with him, and there's a reason why it was such a huge hit to that Virginia Tech defense when he did opt out. You just look at what he's able to do. He brings so much to the table, and he's able to get a lot of takeaways. In 2019, he came away with 4. He had 2 the year before. He just seems like a ball hawk. He's always in the vicinity. He's always able to get his hands on the ball, which is a great trait for any quarterback, especially one going to the next level. He sticks on guys like glue. Then for the 3rd and 4th and 5th, and every guy beyond that, it gets a little bit more dicey. And you can definitely switch some guys in and out. I'd say Asante Samuel is definitely that 3rd guy for me out of Florida State. They have a great history with defensive backs. You see how many they've produced in not that many years. So there's a lot of good guys. Jalen Ramsey's like the cornerstone as far as guys that came out of Florida State. I don't expect him to be the likes of that. He's not the prospect like Ramsey was coming out of college, but he is a very solid one that I would say is viable to be that 3rd player. He's a great tackler, and he's able to get into position to stay in front of receivers very well. I think that that's huge. Then you have a guy like J.C. Horn. He's the physical corner. He's the guy that's all up in your face, and he brings the pop when he does hit you. I think that that's definitely one of the things. He's great in press coverage. That's something a lot of people praise him in. And when he's just up in your grill, he's a lot to handle. So I think that he's more than worthy of that 4th spot. And then after that, I would say Greg Newsome II out of Northwestern, another 2nd as far as names go with Patrick. But he's another really good one out of Northwestern. They had an improving defense over the last 2 seasons. He was a huge part of that in that secondary. He just stays in good position in front of the wide receiver. He's able to stay with them. He sticks with them the whole way throughout their routes, and that goes a long way. It seems like he definitely has the necessary skill set to be one of the higher picks in this draft. We usually see a lot of DBs rattle off, especially near the end of the 1st round, depending on the quality of them. I don't expect him to go that early, but I do think he will be a day 2 guy, and definitely worthy of whichever pick he's able to get taken at.
For me, the number 1, I'm going to go with Patrick Surtain. My thing with Caleb Farley is his injury. Even though they're saying he's fine, he's looked good, I just think that the injury causes some concern. But what you've seen from Farley is he's got the length, he's got the athleticism, he's got great hands, he's going to stick on receivers, he's terrific in coverage. So that's why I have him at number 2 behind Patrick Surtain. I think Patrick Surtain is going to be a very dominant NFL corner. He's the son of former Miami Dolphins and Chiefs corner Patrick Surtain, and he's got the length, he's got discipline, and I think that's big, and he's a guy who's going to hit you hard, and I think that's one of the things I really like about him. And another guy who's got the physicality is J.C. Horn. He's someone who's physical, he's going to hit you, and he's going to hit you hard. So that's why I have Horn at 3. Number 4, I'm going to go Eric Stokes, not just because of his speed, because his speed is insane at the cornerback position, but he's got the ability with that speed to play very, very good man coverage and zone coverage. So I think that his ability to play both sets of coverage very well puts him up there. Then number 5, I am going to go with Greg Newsome II. I think that he's an exciting prospect for me. I think that he's got strong ball skills, and he's got the athleticism and length to where he can make plays. So I think that's why I have Newsome at 5. And lastly, to round out our rankings before the NFL.
Hey! I didn't get my corner rankings.
Oh, I went before Dom.
No, I mean, I don't care that you went before me. I just figured you were going to
I forgot they had to go. Dom, go ahead.
I mean, I have the same 5 names that you guys have, and I actually think the gap between Surtain and Farley is actually quite significant. I mean, I have Farley at number 2 and Surtain at number 1, like both of you guys do. But to me, Farley is a little raw, and he relies a lot on his speed. And, I mean, the speed is his best asset, and it's going to be crucial because at some points in your NFL career, you're going to get beat. And when Surtain gets beat, or when Farley gets beat, I'm going to trust Farley to make up for it a little bit more because I think Farley has a little bit more athleticism. But, I mean, in terms of mechanics and form and physicality, I mean, Surtain checks every single box. And that's not me saying he's not athletic. I'm just saying Farley's a little bit more athletic. So that's 1 and 2. Number 3, Horn. I like his physicality, like Parker was mentioning. I think that translates a little bit more to the NFL than some speed. But in terms of mechanics, he's very choppy, and I'm worried that he could be too physical at times. But still a very good cornerback prospect. He should definitely go in the first round. Asante Samuel at number 4. He was one of the few shining spots on Florida State, and he's just a really solid overall cornerback. The number 5 is Greg Newsome. Just watching film, his IQ really stands out to me. It's another one of those guys in Northwestern. I'm not just saying that because they go to Northwestern. You watch it. It shows on films. He can read the quarterback's eyes and know, like, hey, he's going to come, but I don't want to sell out. Then he can tell, and he just bolts. His lateral quickness stands out on the film, and I'll have Greg Newsome the second in at number 5.
All right, Dom, we're going to swing back to you to conclude it with your top safeties.
Yeah, this isn't exactly a great safety class, but at the top, you got Trayvon Moehrig from TCU, and he is a fantastic safety prospect, one of the best we've seen as of late. And at 6'2" and 200 pounds, he can play in the box like a safety, like the safeties we've seen more recently, but he can also drop back into coverage, cover 2, cover 3, cover 1, whatever you need out of him. Can also cover tight ends and running backs in man-to-man coverage. So just really overall good safety. Another safety that I also really like at number 2 is going to be Andre Cisco. Definitely not a first-round caliber prospect, but he certainly checks all the boxes. And at 6 foot, 209, really big guy. He's going to play more down low than I think up top, but definitely someone to watch out for there. Number 3 safety for me is going to be Javon Holland out of the University of Oregon. Another guy, he's probably going to be playing a little bit more up top, down low in the box and be more of a present against the run. But really good safety. He absolutely dominated that game against University of Southern California. They just weren't able to run the ball, and then Slovis wasn't able to do anything up top. Number 4 are Darius Washington. Now, this is a guy who you'll see playing further back because only at 5'8", 178. Really good IQ in terms of reading quarterbacks and whether or not they're going to go to the arm sideline or to the other sideline or stick down the middle. Super fast. He can play some coverage, but the 5'8" frame is going to be a little concerning. You can't fix that, but super athletic and super smart. And then number 5 is Hamza Nasir-Al-Din out of Florida State. And he's at 6'4", 220 pounds. I think he's the most physically demanding safety. He will certainly be a box safety, and he's going to punish teams that are going to try and run the ball. And if you're facing a team, say like the Lions or some team that runs the ball, doesn't have a great quarterback, you're going to be seeing a guy like Hassam Nasir-Al-Din taking over those games because he's going to be able to defend against the run and add another player into the box where as opposed to like a 5 or 6 or 7 man box, now you're going to have safeties in there.
Parker.
For me, it's pretty much the same. The common consensus, I do agree, like this safety class is a little bit underwhelming. There's not too many names that get you really excited if you're a team that's in need of that position in particular. I think that guys like Cisco and Holland they're just playmakers. Like they find ways to get their hands on the ball. They both came away with a significant amount of picks. Cisco not quite as much last season, but as a whole in his career over there at Syracuse, he was able to get a lot of takeaways. The same thing can be said for Holland. With Holland, one of the things I do know is he can get a little bit handsy, he can be a little bit too physical. And I would say that as far as DBs go, he's like J.C. Horn in that sense, where his best trait can sometimes be his biggest weakness, depending on how he goes about utilizing it. So I think that that's one thing that's worth mentioning with him. As for not even a 4th and a 5th, but a 5th guy that I don't think should be regarded in the top 5 or anything like that, but I do think is an interesting one that I did watch more than most of these guys was Talanoa Hufanga, and that was a safety out of USC. And he's very different from those top 3 guys because of the fact that he gets after the quarterback. He's a more physical player who can run stuff, And especially, like I mentioned, I put emphasis on get the quarterback. He had multiple sacks, and I think that that's a trait that we see a lot of times. You see a lot of blitz packages with safeties or guys that can stay in the box, like you mentioned with Cisco. And I think that he is definitely one of those guys that can be like that. And I mentioned him because he is more of a gem. He's not going to go very high like these other guys. So I think that whoever is able to get a guy like that later, more like in the middle or later half of the draft, can potentially get themselves a steal. So I figured he was worth mentioning as far as this list goes.
For me, I'm going to go with Trevon Moehrig as my top guy as safety. He's a ball hawk. He has 7 career interceptions, which stands out. He has a knack for the ball. His IQ's pretty solid. I like his aggressive and physicality, where he's grown a lot last year. He became a guy who's very much willing to help out and run support and make some big hits. My other guy is Andre Cisco. I think he is a second-round product, early to mid-second-round guy, in my opinion. I think that in just 24 games, he had 13 interceptions and 14 pass breakups. He's got a knack for the ball. He's a ball magnet, really, and he's got the ability to make the athletic plays. So his size, his ball hawk nature, his athleticism really pair all together well to it, where I think he could be a rotational piece and be a solid piece anywhere at the back end of the defense. And then my last guy that I want to look at is going to be Richie Grant out of UCF. I like Richie Grant. He was pretty productive over his collegiate career, and that was with his ball production. He was able to play very well in deep single high situations, split zones, and do well man coverage and make multiple plays. So I really like him out of UCF. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that's going to conclude this episode of the 4-3 Show. Next week, we will have our mock drafts for this year's NFL draft that takes place next Thursday. Thank you very much for watching, and have a great rest